Hello guys and gals, and welcome! Welcome to my first episode of Resistances, and probably my last, because this topic is not extremely complicated, but it is something that I want to go over for the newer players, so that they understand what's going on with their characters, and how to make their characters more tanky, so to speak. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at our resistances in normal with absolutely no modifiers. Now, if you have completed the two previous quests for normal and nightmare difficulty, you should have a base resistances of 20, because each time you complete the quest for Mala, saving Anya, going to Mala, Mala will give you a scroll of resistance, which will increase your resistances by 10% permanently per act, up to 30%. And the reason why I have the third scroll in my inventory here is because I want to show you that works. Now, you can increase your resistances via equipment, and the only class in the game that can increase their resistances not by equipment is the Barbarian with the skill Natural Resistance. Barbarians actually have this amazing skill. When you put points into it, will just automatically increase your base resistances by a rather huge margin. As you can see here, just a couple points can bring your resistances up to an amazing level. Definitely a skill that you're going to want to put a couple points into as a barbarian. But you'll notice here that once we hit a certain point, we are stuck. We are at 75%, which is our cap. The only way to improve the cap on all characters, with the exception of Paladin, and I will go over that later, is to use equipment which increases the maximum resistance. So for instance, if we have a Templar Guardian Angel coat here, we could put Guardian Angel coat on, and you will notice that our resistances are now ungoldenfied. Ungoldenfied means that they are no longer capped. So how high can we get our resistances? So for that reason, I've prepared a set and a single item. The Guardian Angel Templar coat increases all maximum resistances by 15%. And the Iratha's set, when you complete the entire set, will also increase your resistances by another 10%. Which means that if you wear the Guardian Angel Templar coat and the Iratha set together, you will be at an amazing 95% to all resistances. However, let's take a look at our character in a higher difficulty setting. So let's go to Nightmare. In Nightmare, we're still capped. All right, so let's go to Hell. In Hell, we're not capped, so we're at 41 to all resistances. Let's go ahead and read our Scroll of Mala and get ourselves our extra 10%, which we deserve, because we completed that quest in Hell. Now we are at 51%. So if we were wearing this particular group of items, and we had 51 to all resistances, we could put a couple more points in, and we could increase our resistances even further with Natural Resistance. But Natural Resistance does have its cap, essentially. So the maximum that it can provide. Let's go ahead and put some points into it. And you'll see that at level 20, we're getting 67%, and we're still not capped. So we're going to have to get even higher in Hell. Now, the reason for that is that in Hell difficulty, they reduce your resistances by 100. So you get a straight negative 100 to all your resistances in Hell. In Nightmare difficulty, it's negative 50, and in normal difficulty, you basically start at 0. So there's no penalty, but you also don't get any bonus. Now, with the 3 Scrolls of Mala, you will go to 30% base, which means that in Hell, it will turn to negative 70. So you still have to overcome the 70 negative just to get to 0, and then you have to get another 75 if you want to get to the base cap, or 95 to get to the solid top cap. All right. Now, we are currently, even with this amazing equipment of the 15% max, the huge amount of resistances, max natural resistances, we are still not at the cap for Hell. So as you can see, building your resistances can be quite difficult. Now, granted, we don't have any boots, no rings, and we have no shield and sword on, so those can provide more resistances, as well as you can get resistances from charms. The next thing we're going to look at here are these 2 rings. So another effect that you can get is absorption. All right. So there are two forms of absorption. There is absorption in the form of percentage, like the Dwarf Star Ring here, or the Ravenfrost, which absorbs 20% of cold damage, or 15% of cold damage. Now, it is important to note that absorption works in a very beneficial way. So, let's go ahead and bring up a calculator, because that's going to be our next step. All right, so here we have our calculator, and what we're going to do with this calculator is we are going to calculate some cold damage on our character. So let us say that we have our 62% cold resistance here. We're going to take an attack, a cold. Let's say a monster dies, and they dish out 1,000 cold damage to us. All right, so 1,000 cold damage comes in and has to run a check against our resistances. First, the damage is going to be reduced by 62%, which is going to make it 380 damage. All right, then 20% of that is going to be subtracted, which means that it will reduce 76 damage. You will also be healed for 76, so another 76 will be reduced, because you have to think about the fact that it is taking 76 damage from the cold, and then it is applying that 76 damage to your HP. So absorption works double of what the number says in terms of how it actually affects the damage that comes in. So we would be looking at 228 damage left over from a 1,000 damage attack. Now let's do that calculation again and pretend we have 95% resistances, all right? So we are going to run 1,000 damage minus 95%. So we're looking at 50 damage left over. And then we are going to apply a different kind of absorption. So let's say we have a helmet on and it gives plus 24 cold absorb. So not percentage, but straight 24. All right, so we're going to subtract 24. That is going to leave us with 26 damage actually being applied to our character. That 24 that was subtracted has to be reapplied to our hit points as a heal. So we're going to subtract another 24, which means that of that 1,000 damage dealt to us, only 2 damage is actually going to make it through all of the resistances. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, can I make a character that is basically immune to damage? Well, yes, you can. The fact of the matter is that when your character reaches a certain point in its resistances, you will be, for all intents and purposes, practically immune to all damage, because the absorption will heal you for any damage that makes it through, and your resistances will be high enough to counter the majority of the damage. So now that we've talked about how high you can get resistances, let's talk about how low your resistances can go. Now, the lowest possible amount of resistances that you can have is negative 100. And you might be asking yourself, well, how would I get to negative 100 if I am doing my best to raise my resistances as high as possible? Well, there are ways that your resistances can be reduced. For instance, the lower resistance curse from Necromancer. The amplified damage curse from Necromancer will reduce your physical resistance. The Decrepify curse will reduce your physical resistance as well, but only by 50%. So while amplified damage is 100% negative to your physical resistance, Decrepify is negative 50% to your physical resistance. Lower resistance curse varies depending on the level of the curse, so it's kind of hard to explain that one. And Conviction will also reduce your resistances. Now, granted, there will be situations where you'll go out into, say, one of the places in hell, and you'll come across a monster who is aura enchanted, or you'll go to Act 4 or Act 5, and you will be cursed by a monster, and those monsters will cause you to lower your resistances. Now, when you are next to a monster who has Conviction, you can look at your panel and you will actively see that your resistances will be going down, and by what amount. The only way to counter this is to have more resistances than what the Conviction is taking away from you. Now, while you cannot specifically go above the cap, You can raise the cap to 95%, but you cannot go above it. You actually can have resistances above that number, they just don't do anything. So that when you come across a monster or a player who has negative resistances, you can counter those negative resistances with your positive resistances above the cap. This is a way that PvP players are able to take on, for instance, a cold sorceress who has negative resistances. They would stack up resistances for cold well above the cap for cold resistance, so that when the sorceress's negative resistance is applied to the character, they are still in a safe zone. Another form of resistance that you can get in this game is called damage reduced by. And damage reduced by is specifically physical damage. Now, unlike elemental resistances, which can go up to 75 cap and can be increased to 95% with the effect of items, physical damage reduction can only go up to 50% total. You can get that in many different ways. You can get it from equipment. You can also get it from skills, believe it or not. So although the skill Fade on the Assassin does not specifically say that it increases your physical resistance, Fade does in fact increase your physical resistance. So let's go take a look at a Assassin real quick. And we're going to take a look at the skill Fade, and you see that it says raises all resistances and resist curses for a period of time. Resist curse duration by 47%, resist all by 19%, duration 120 seconds. Does not have any mention of physical damage resistance there. However, I can guarantee you that Fade will increase your physical damage resistance by 1% per level, every level you increase it. So when it hits level 20, you will have 20% physical damage reduction. So it's a very, very good skill Fade. This is one of the only ways that you can reduce physical damage in the game, by using damage reduced by equipment or by building up the skill Fade. Now, I definitely would recommend having some physical damage reduction, especially because amplified damage is a very common curse that reduces your physical resistance by 100%. So keep in mind that as a character, you start with 0% physical resistance. And if you can manage to build your physical resistance up to 50%, you will be able to resist the effects of Decrepify, because it will bring you down to 0. And you'll be able to resist the effects of Amplified Damage, which will bring you down to -50, but not -100. You might be asking yourself, what does negative resistance mean? Well, it basically means that you're taking more damage than you would normally. So for instance, if I were to have -100% to my resistances, you could literally just do that in a very simple calculation of, if I'm going to take 1,000 damage from a physical attack and I have -100% resistances, then I'm going to take plus 100% damage. So I'm going to double the incoming damage to 2,000. So very, very deadly, as you can see. However, if I were to have a 50% damage reduction, and then somebody were to hit me with a amplified damage curse, I would only be at -50%, which means that 1,000 damage would only be increased by 50%. So I would not be taking as much damage. This applies to all of the resistances, so fire, lightning, ice, poison, and physical. And in particular, there are only two ways to bring down physical resistance, and that is the Amplified Damage and the Decrepify Curse. So do be aware that when you are under the effect of Amp and Decrepify, it can cause some serious issues. As well as Conviction and Lower Resist can cause you some very serious issues as well. Because you can go from, you know, a moderately nice looking set of resistances, and then all of a sudden Conviction will hit you and you will be like, whoa, whoa. Because you look at your bar and you're at like -20, -16, -30, 10, 0. And the reason why this is because those Conviction auras can be very, very deadly. But keep in mind that you can also use those Conviction auras to your benefit to reduce their resistances. So there's that. Now, it doesn't really matter how you get your resistances, whether your resistances come from charms, whether they come from equipment, whether they come from runes or gems. But do yourself a favor and try to get yourself a decent amount of resistances so that when you come across monsters like lightning enchanted monsters, monsters that are shooting elemental attacks like the gloams in Act 4 that are always in the City of the Damned. Whatever it is that you're coming across, whatever it is that you're fighting, have a little bit of resistances so that you don't die. And if you do happen to come across a conviction monster, it's probably a good idea not to fight too close to it. In my opinion, what I would normally do is just back away so that the conviction aura wouldn't get to me, because it does have a radius effect. However, some of the very high-level conviction auras do have an extremely large radius, and they are very hard to fight against. In that case, what a lot of people will do is they will have a set, kind of like an alternate set, maybe like an Ancient's Pledge or something on the other swap hand, something that they can use to completely negate the conviction in that particular case. And especially in PvP, so if I was PvPing a Necromancer or something, and all of a sudden a cold damage sorceress came into the game, I might go to my stash and see if I could pick up a cold resistance shield or something to put on, just temporarily, so that I have an extra buffer of resistance against the sorceress. Maybe even throw on a Raven Frost for good measure, so I get that 20% cold absorb. In fact, you can make one character practically nigh invincible by putting on all the equipment, which raises your resistances to 95%, and having on cold, fire, and lightning absorption, all in one neat little package. Anyway, I hope this video has been a little bit enlightening to everyone. It is definitely a fun thing to build your character to be very tanky. I have definitely done this before, where I have made a character nigh invincible from resistances. And I would be lapse in judgment if I did not show you one more ability, which is on the Druid. I know I've got a Druid right here somewhere. There we go. So the Druid has a very interesting ability called Cyclone Armor. Cyclone Armor absorbs elemental damage directly, and in PvP can be absolutely devastating because it will completely absorb most elemental attacks, obviously not poison, that come at you, and completely negate them. Now, as you level this up, it can get to an extremely high amount of elemental resistance or absorption. So, for instance, if you were to level up Hurricane, Tornado, Twister, they all give 7% to the absorption per level, and then, of course, 20 points in Cyclone Armor itself. It can be a huge boon to your defensive capabilities, both in PvP and in PvE. It is also very easy to cast, and it is fast castable. So you could literally just sit there and just hold down right-click and be immune to fire, lightning, and cold. It is important to note that this particular skill is not going to shield you from magic damage or poison damage. So keep that in mind when you are touting your invulnerability, that a Necromancer, a Hammerdin, or, there are quite a few monsters in the game that have magic damage projectiles. Those monsters are going to slice right through this as if it wasn't there. And last but not least, we are going to go take a look at a Paladin. So I did say at the beginning of this video that one particular character out of all the characters has what is called a natural increase in its maximum resistance. So Paladins have 3 auras. They have resist fire, resist cold, and resist lightning. And these 3 auras will provide, even though they do not say it, this is another hidden effect, okay? Even though they do not say it, they will provide 1% to the maximum resistance of each individual resistance up to the cap, okay? Every 2 levels. I know that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but think about it, all right? If I put 20 points into resist fire, I will gain 10% to my maximum resistance, which will raise me from a fire resistance of 75 to a fire resistance of 85. And I can do this for all three. There are definitely some very interesting ways you can build this. For instance, Vengeance, which is one of the Paladin's main abilities, has synergies connected to resist fire, resist cold, and resist lightning, which means that if you were to build a Vengeance Paladin, the Vengeance Paladin would have 20, 20, 20. So he would have 10, 10, 10 in his resistances. So he would have a natural 85% max on his resistances with no equipment, which means that he could augment that even further to get to the 95% cap. This is the only character who has the ability to raise their maximum immunities by skill points. Just like the Barbarian is the only class that has the ability to raise his resistances by skill points. Well, I think we've covered just about everything in regards to resistances. We've covered Conviction, bringing down your resistances, the penalties for Normal, Nightmare, and Hell. We've also covered the maximum resistance increases, as well as the absorption abilities on items. So if you're interested in anything further on this, you will find that as you explore the game, there are a wealth of items that will provide you with bonuses to individual resistances, individual caps to resistances, like for instance there is the unique item, the Inferno Stride boots, or the Hotspur boots, which will give you specifically plus to your maximum fire resist, or the Nozikin relic. And those are interesting items because you can use them to beef up an individual resistance to a higher level. The Paladin, however, is just one of the most interesting ones because he can do it without items. Well, as always, thank you for watching, and I do appreciate you guys tuning in. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And as always, thanks for watching.